In this video, I want to recap on what's known as variable scope. And it's not that difficult, but it's something that you need to be aware of because it can cause quite a few programming errors if you don't fully understand it. So here we go. I have a script already written, and you can see in line 8 here, I'm creating a variable, and I've called it a global variable. That's the name of the variable, and I put it equal to the value 10. So a global variable is a variable that you declare, just like I have in line 8, and indeed pretty much most of the scripts I've written to date, I've used global variables. And global variables are variables that you create normally in a Python code, in a Python script, in a file that contains Python code, and it's known as a global variable, and it's visible to all code inside in the file. So any code inside in this file here can see this variable, and when I say see it, I mean they can access the value that it's stored, and they can even write a new value into the variable if they wish. Here I'm creating a function, and I've just called it test function 1. And inside in the function, I have declared a variable. So in line 8, I'm declaring a global variable, which is declared outside of the function. And when I say declaring a variable, declaring is the term used to sort of create a variable. So in line 8, I'm declaring a variable outside of a function. And in line 11, I'm declaring a variable, but it's inside in the function. And this variable here, called my favorite number, is actually what they call a local variable. It's only visible, it can only be accessed, that is, within the function. So in here, for example, I can, there you go, I'm accessing it and I'm printing it out as part of a print statement. I could also change its value, that would be no problem. So within a function, you can access the variables that you created in that function, and those variables are called local variables. Functions can also access variables that were global variables that were created outside of the function. And you can see that going on in line 12, where this function is printing out the value of the global variable which was declared outside of the function. So my point is there's two types of variables. Well, there's actually more than two, but we'll stick with two for the time being, and they are global variables and local variables. Global variables are declared outside of functions and can be accessed, that is, written to and read anywhere in the file. And local variables are declared inside in the function and can only be used inside in that function. Here you go here. If I try and write to a local variable here. So here you go, in line 21, I'm trying to write to this variable up here in line 11. So I declared inside in the test function 1 function, in line 11, I declared a variable called my favorite number, and I put it equal to 20. Now outside of the function, in line 21, I'm trying to write to it. And it looks like I succeed, actually, because I don't get an error. But what actually happens is when Python hits that line 21, rather than access the variable that I declared in line 11, rather than sort of put this variable here equal to 100, it creates a new variable called my favorite number. Now there's sort of two variables, both with the same name. There's this variable, which is a global variable, and there's this one, which is a local variable that can only be used inside in the function. So while I thought I was actually accessing this local variable, what I ended up actually doing was creating a new global variable and putting it equal to 100. Because of course, I can't access the local variable. They're the rules. You can't access it. So if you try to access it, what actually happens is you end up creating a global variable of the same name. So here is another example. I've created another function called test function 2. And in here, I'm going to try and write to the global variable. So in this function up here, test function 1, I was reading it. I just was printing out its value. This time I'm going to actually try to write it. So the global variable is set to 10. And here in line 28, inside in this function, I'm trying to change the value of the global variable to be 50 rather than 10. So what actually happens, of course, is when I call the function, Python doesn't change the value of the global variable and put it equal to 50. It actually thinks I'm creating a local variable with the same name as the global variable. So Python actually declares or creates a new variable that's local called the global variable. So now things are starting to get confusing. So at this point here, I have two variables. Both of them are called a global variable. So both of them have the same name. One of them is local and can only be used inside here. And one of them is global. It can be used anywhere. So the minute, if you're in a function and you try to write to a global variable, you're okay if you're just reading it. But if you try to write to a global variable, like assign it a value, what Python will do is will assume you're not trying to write to the global variable, but you're actually trying to create a new local variable and write to that. So how do you, if that's not what I wanted to do, if I genuinely wanted to write to the global variable and not actually create a new local variable, how would I do it? Well, the answer is you use this keyword called global. So here you go, test function 3. And here I'm declaring a variable. But I'm not declaring a variable. Here I'm using the keyword global, and I'm putting the name of the global variable that I will be accessing in this function. So this is telling Python, by the way, I am going to be assigning a value to a variable called the global variable, and it is a global variable. I don't want you to create a new local variable for me. So now what happens in this particular case, when you call this function, it will change the value of this here from 10 to 50. And it won't do what was happening up here, which was creating a new local variable of the same name. So a little bit confusing, yeah, but just try to keep it as clear as possible in your head. Largely speaking, there's two types of variables. One is a global variable, one is a local variable. Global variables can be accessed anywhere in your file. Local variables can only be accessed inside in the function that they were created in. For example, this one. When you're in a function, you can read either the local variable that you created or the global variable that you didn't create. You can write to the local variable that you created. Global functions, if you're in a function and you want to access the global function and write to it, you have to use the keyword global. So you have to put that before the name of the global variable you want to write to, and then write to it. If you don't, what Python will do is actually create a local variable of the same name. So that's it. What it requires is lots and lots of practice. As you practice your code, you'll get much better. Your understanding of this will get much, much better. But it is a source of some errors for some new programmers.